on Facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. We've got Ira Jacobson and Ed Meyer on YouTube with a few other people. Sorry, on Facebook. And just bear in mind, I'm gonna mainly take a conversation over here on the Facebook chat, on the Zoom chat, which is primarily where I'm gonna be able to focus. And that's where we're going to make the main platform over here. So without further ado, I want to start off and say, first of all, l'chaim to everybody. You are all muted. I mute everybody as the coordinator of the meeting, just to allow for a more productive meeting. If you do want to say something, please feel free to interject. Just unmute yourself, and that will allow for a more productive meeting, so it doesn't sound like Chinese fire drill when one person is talking at a time. If you want to say something, by all means, gesundheit hate. We'd love to have you. We'd love to hear from you. And that would be great. However, for starters, the default setting position is where everybody's muted. Only I'm able to speak. If you do want to say something, feel free to interject. I will be checking from time to time on see how things are going over there on the live feeds. I see that on YouTube, we got a slow start. We just got started, but on Facebook, we got Iraz and Rosa Kalmowitz, a little crowd collecting on YouTube, on Facebook as well, which is great. So without further ado, I'm just going to go straight into it by first of all saying l'chaim to everybody. It's 1 week to Pesach. Tonight in 1 week is the searching of the chametz, b'dikas chametz, when it's customary to hide the 10 pieces of chametz around your house and to search for the chametz. It's very important, if you haven't done so already, to sell your chametz, to make sure that you don't own any chametz on Passover. The way to do that, you can do it right now online. On the internet, go to jewishgardens.com/set-me-free. That's jewishgardens.com/set-me-free, where you can simply fill out the form with your addresses where you want to sell the chametz, and you will not be owning any chametz on Pesach. You'll be able to properly fulfill the mitzvah. So that's happening in one night from tonight, and I want to say l'chaim to the fact that we are celebrating Passover like we've never done before. It's going to be an extraordinary Passover, and what this lesson is tonight all about, we're going to spend about an hour on this, is making sure that we can understand four main questions on Pesach, and these are they: why, what, when, and how. Those are the questions that we are planning to cover tonight. Why, what, when, and how. So l'chaim to that. Before we begin, thank you for joining me, everybody, here on Facebook, facebook.com/Jewish Gardens, on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, and on the Zoom meeting where we're able to be more engaged. L'chaim. If you'd like to engage and interact, we'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. You could please join us by unmuting yourself on Zoom and saying something, or you could do so on YouTube or Facebook.com by posting a comment, and I'll be checking it from time to time. Now, I do want to say that those of you that are watching on social media, would be lovely if you could. It would be lovely if you could join us. If you could share that was possible for this mitzvah of celebrating Passover at your own home this year. Many people are stressed out by this, and they're a little concerned. It's interesting. This Shabbos is called Shabbat HaGadol, which means the Great Shabbat. The Great Shabbat is for as many various reasons why it's called the Great Shabbat. I'm going to try to keep this conversation a little bit more focused, and I'm going to say that one of the reasons why it's called the Great Shabbos, Mickey's going to love this one, is because the sermon of the rabbi is supposed to be a great sermon. Great in length, great in depth and profundity. It's supposed to address what we're doing here tonight, which is addressing the how, the what, the why of the Yontif. It's supposed to be a big sermon. It's supposed to be a packed house, and everybody's supposed to come and learn about how to observe the Yontif in the best possible manner. Now, unfortunately, this year nobody's going to be in shul. So instead of doing the Shabbat HaGadol sermon on Shabbat, we're going to do it right here on social media, reaching far more people than we could have reached on regular turf. And we're going to go straight into it. Good. So if you have any questions, do post. If you have any comments to start us off on Zoom or not, would love to hear from you. It's going to be more of a Farbrengen conversation. I'm going to go straight into it. You know, Pesach is a time of fond memories. It's when the family gets together. It's when we're not worried about running to business or problems or nonsense, you know, all sorts of external distractions. Pesach is when we can get together. We can sit around the table with those nearest and dearest to our hearts, with the most beautiful memories, because Judaism is centered around the table. It's very interesting, you know, that Other religions might be centered around the church or the mosque or some other religious building. But in Judaism, the synagogue doesn't actually serve as great a part as we think it does in Judaism. The center, the heart of Yiddishkeit is actually around our kitchen tables. That is where the majority of mitzvahs apply. A great minority of mitzvahs actually apply inside of the synagogue. The majority of mitzvahs apply, at least in these days, inside of. So for us to be able to be celebrating Passover this year around our own tables, a little lonely, maybe not with your children or grandchildren, is actually the way that God intended it to be. This is exactly what God wanted it to be, obviously, because that's how it's turning out. God knows exactly what he's doing. We don't. And therefore, he's got a plan. So we're going to roll with the punches and we're going to do our best to make it the most meaningful, most enjoyable Seder that we possibly are able to do. I'd just like to highlight to you an interesting observation, and that is that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, always made sure to observe his Seder, at least in the right after his wife passed away in 1988. He observed it all by himself. The Rebbe would sit by himself to observe the Passover Seder. And I want you to think about that for a moment. Here's a man who's responsible for more Seders than any other human being on earth. He was the one that came up with this whole idea that there's 4 sons, the wise, the wicked, and the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. But the Rebbe came, and that's why we have the 4 cups of wine, right? The Rebbe said that there's a 5th cup of wine on the table, the cup of Elijah, corresponding to the 5th son. The one that doesn't even know that tonight is Pesach. He's in a casino in the Bahamas, so he's on a beach somewhere, God knows where. He doesn't even know it's Pesach. And the Rebbe said our mission is to go out and find and make sure that we don't leave that son behind. That's what the Rebbe's, one of the main legacies of the Rebbe is making sure that no Jew is left behind. Yet the Rebbe managed to observe Passover all by himself. And perhaps the reason for that is so that all those thousands and thousands of Jews that for whatever reason have to be alone at their Pesach Seder, maybe it was in order to make them feel that their Seder was also a worthy and a valid and an important Seder. If even the Rebbe could be sitting all by himself after his wife passed away in 1988 at the Seder, then we too are also okay if we're sitting by ourselves. How much more so if you're sitting with your spouse? If you have 1 or 2 people around the table, it's not so terrible. Right? And what's really also interesting is that the way that it was first done, I've mentioned this in my writings recently, the way the Passover was first observed in the original Passover was when we all were alone in our homes. Israel gave out a directive, I think yesterday. The rabbis of Israel said that only the residents of a household are allowed to eat together the Passover Seder. You're not allowed to have any guests. And that's effectively what's happening here in our quasi-quarantine situation in Palm Beach, here in the United States of America, where we are also having Seders, only the members of the household together. We're having it exactly like the original Passover Seder. So there's certainly no reason for us to feel any less worthy this year because somehow we're not sitting around with our family, with our friends. It's us, and we're going to make the best of it this year. It's the way it was originally intended, and it's going to be beautiful. Remember that Passover Seders were always anything but ordinary. There were stories of a Passover Seder in the concentration camp, where it was Vaihingen concentration camp, Pesach 1943, where the camp resident Moshe Pearl related a story of how he needed to bake matzahs in this concentration camp, and he came up with a very interesting story. He was involved in making dummy targets for target practice for the Nazis, and he came up with an idea. He told his officer of the Nazis who was overseeing him that he needed a lot of flour to be able to stick the targets to the dummies that the Nazis could practice shooting. And how much flour would he need? He needed 5 pounds of flour, and he was able to use the extra flour that he didn't really need to bake matzahs. And there they were, about 20 Jews celebrating Pesach inside of the Vaihingen concentration camp. Can you imagine if they were able to pull off Seders, then how much more so can we also pull off Seders? There's a joke going around that this year Passover is canceled due to a plague. But really, we're tougher than that. Tough times don't last. Tough people do. No, there's a plague going on. It's biblical in its story of how we are observing Passover exactly like the first Passover. There was a plague raging on the outside, the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. And yet we were able to make sure that it happens. We're doing the same thing again over here this year, and we're going to make the best of it. There's a good joke. You must have heard of this one, but I'm going to say it anyways because it's a good one. One of my favorites is this elderly gentleman. He calls up his son in Phoenix, and he says, "Son, I've had it with your mother. 45 years of hell. It's too much for me. We're getting divorced." And the son is like, "Oh my God, Dad, this is crazy. There's no warning. Hold on, Dad, don't do anything. I'm calling my sister." Two minutes later, he gets a phone call from Washington. It's his daughter calling. "Dad, she's in tears. How can you do this? Dad, I'm begging of you, please don't make any move. My brother and I, we're gonna be there tomorrow morning. Don't do anything until we get there." And the story goes, it's a famous joke, but it's a good one. The famous joke is he hangs up the phone. His wife, the old man's wife, she asks him, "No, what did you say to the kids?" He said, "It doesn't matter, but I can tell you that the kids are coming for Passover this year, and they're paying their own airfare." So we might not be able to have it this way this year. We might not have our kids with us this year. I have my kids with me this year. We're little, small families, right? Little families, young families is what I meant. And we're going to make the best of it too. And wherever you are, I encourage you to do exactly the same thing, to do the best of it. One final point is that there is a lot of talk about the Zoom Seder. The Zoom Seder. You've heard about this one, that everyone's saying that there's certain rabbis, Sephardic rabbis out of Israel, that are saying that you're allowed to do the Zoom Seder. You can turn the Zoom on before Yontiv and make sure not to turn it off on Yontiv, to keep it on, I think they said. And because it's only an emergency situation, it's okay to Zoom in your kids and grandkids. Now, I would say that there's many, many problems associated with that. It's a very fine line. So I would highly encourage you to rather have the Zoom Seder with your kids before nightfall, before sundown on next Wednesday night. Have some time with the family, sing the songs, talk about Passover, have the conversations. But when it comes to the actual Seder, which we're going to cover in a few minutes, that part you should observe. I would encourage you to do it without the Zoom if you can. If you absolutely need to, then do what you need to do, because there certainly are shoulders to rely on. However, there are so many caveats and so many opportunities that might fall into become a problem. I would caution you from doing that. In any event, let's get on into this. And remember, I said to you in the beginning that what we're going to cover in this lesson is 4 things in the hour, and that is why, what, when, and how. Why, what, when, and how, to be able to help you understand how to run your own Passover Seder in a way that's absolutely meaningful, in a way that you're going to be able to really feel confident about your Seder being something that's acceptable and beautiful before Hashem. So for starters, I want to start off by saying that there's a lot happening over here on Passover night. It is the holiest night of the year. It's called Leil Shimurim, the night of guarding. In South Africa, where we have security gates and electric fencing and dogs and all sorts of things, my father would always make sure to leave the front door open on Passover night, because it's the night of guarding. It's the night where Hashem himself protects us. We have absolutely nothing to be afraid of, and therefore we are totally confident in Hashem's blessing of us on Passover night. So there's tremendous, tremendous energy at play going on Passover night. And the question is, how can we possibly tap into that energy? That's the big question. How can we possibly tap into the energy that's going on? Like many other things in Judaism, most other things on the Jewish calendar, they recur on the Jewish calendar. Like we say in the Purim Megillah, and these days are remembered and fulfilled. When we remember the days, that is how those days become fulfilled. That's how the energy of the day actually comes to the fore. When we observe the various observances and the mitzvahs of the night of Pesach, or of the night or of the day of Purim, we're actually drawing upon ourselves the energy of that day. The energy of the night of Pesach is the energy of freedom. And to be able to draw that upon ourselves, we need to be able to have the right tools to get there. Those tools are the 3 essentials of the Passover Seder, which is Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, which we don't have today. We have the Afikomen instead of it. Afikomen is the matzah that we eat at the end of the Seder. We have the matzah, and we have the maror, the bitter herbs. The purpose of these three three items is not just pure sentimental value. They are actually keys. And that's how I want you to think of them in terms of this conversation, that the 15 steps of the Passover Seder are actually the keys of a lock. Just like, you know, you have those locks where you have to turn, like, let's say 15 numbers in a row in order to open the safe or to open the code. That's what these 15 steps of the Passover Seder are. They're not suggestions. They're not recommendations. They're not cute sentimental observances. They are code. So that when we experience the 15 items of the Seder, and more specifically, the essentials of the Seder, which we're going to be covering here in a few minutes, that's when we're accessing the code and drawing all those blessings of freedom and divine providence upon ourselves, endowing us and our loved ones with the energy that we need to be able to break out of our own Egypt. What does that mean, our own Egypt? Not just remembering something that happened 3,332 years ago, but breaking out of an Egypt. The word Egypt in Hebrew means limitations, shackles, or bondage. Breaking out of our own shackles and bondage. This is a concept which is why it's so important for us to constantly talk and remind ourselves of the Exodus from Egypt. It's actually the third paragraph of the Shema. The third paragraph, which we say every morning and every evening, is the mitzvah to remember the Exodus from Egypt, because we constantly have to break free out of our own shackles and bondage. What I mean in modern day terms is breaking out of our own addictions, breaking out of our own attachments, our own bad habits, breaking out of our own problems. If you're codependent or attached to another human being, if you're addicted to alcohol or to drugs or to sex, or if you're addicted to your cell phone, right? And maybe that's ruining your relationship in a way that you can't even control because you're so intensely addicted to your cell phone, then this energy of Passover is what we all need as human beings. As human beings, we're essentially drawn towards addiction of all sorts of creative kinds of addictions, and we need the energy of Passover to break ourselves free from the way we were yesterday to be higher, more enlightened, and more liberated people today. That's really the energy of Passover, and that's what we're trying to achieve through these keys. So again, so we just discussed the why of Pesach, and we're on to step 2 of our 4 steps of our conversation tonight: the why, the what, the when, and the how. So let's talk about the what. Hopefully you've understood the why. And now, again, if you have any questions, please do feel free to comment, to unmute yourself on Zoom, and to ask your questions. I'm just going to check the Facebook feed. I see we've got some Arabic going in here in Facebook. It's nice. Stephanie Kaufman, Hani Levine, Georgie Lakatos. Wonderful to have everybody joining us here on Facebook as well as on YouTube. No comments on YouTube, but we have viewers. And on Facebook as well. Looks like we've got a group of about 50 people here in total, which is lovely to be able to bring everybody here together. Good to see everybody. I'm hoping that this is making sense. Stephanie, am I connecting with you? Are you able to understand what's going on over here? You good? Fantastic. Any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself to ask your question. It's like Rob Berger tells me that I draw energy from my congregation. So when I know that you're there, when I know that you're with me, that you're listening and understanding and questioning or criticizing, that gives me oomph to be able to take it over the top. Okay. Again, l'chaim, keep me going here. Aha, good. So, the what of the Seder involves the following. You know, if you went to a birthday party, there's normally birthday cake, candles, birthday songs. Imagine if somebody was to ask a question: how much cake do we need to eat from the birthday cake to fulfill the mitzvah? How long do we have to sing the song of happy birthday, and in how many languages, in order to fulfill our obligation of the happy birthday? People would look at you like you're a little, like you're kind of losing it, right? Yet when it comes to Pesach, this is what we're all asking. There's one way to do it, and then there's the right way to do it. The very word Seder actually means order, because it's supposed to be structured in a very, very specific order in order for us to be able to experience the blessings that we're trying to draw upon ourselves. Just like a bride wants her wedding gown to be just perfect. And just like, you know, when you go to the parking, when you park in New York City and you're just 2 inches over the line, that's when you get the ticket, right? And just like when the footballer in the NFL is taking that football over the line and he missed the line by half an inch, It's close, but no cigar. Just like it is with an email address or a phone number, if you dialed one digit off, you're just not going to reach your destination. The same thing is with a mitzvah. The mitzvah is a code. The mitzvah means to connect, not only to connect us. Well, it means to connect us with Hashem. To be able to connect us with Hashem, you need to have the right code. If you're fulfilling the mitzvah in the proper way, that's when you're connecting and drawing down the blessing of freedom upon yourself and fulfilling the mitzvah the way that you're supposed to do it. Think of a Jew in Russia who managed to procure for himself a little bit of matzah in the gulag or something, and then had it confiscated a day before Pesach. And he's sitting over there meditating about the Passover Seder all night long. And then you have another Jew in Manhattan. And, he bumped into a Chabadnik somewhere, and the Chabadnik sort of stuffed a box of matzah into his hands, and he remembered that he left it on the coffee table. Comes Passover night, and he sees the matzah on the table. He's like, oh, I think it's Passover tonight. And then he has a bite, he eats some matzah. Which one of those two fulfilled the Passover more? Was it A or B? Was it the Jew in the gulag who didn't actually eat the matzah? Or was it the Jew in Manhattan who was so busy with his night clubbing and whatever else that he was doing, but he actually ate the matzah? One might think that it's the Jew that in Siberia, that's the one that observed Passover better, but the answer is no. Fulfilling the mitzvah is observing the mitzvah. The one that did the deed, hakol haylech achar ha'maaseh, everything follows the action. And if you were able to do the action, that's when you did the deed. Now, that's when you fulfilled the mitzvah. So that's what we're going to talk about today, which is, what do you need to do in order to be able to properly fulfill this mitzvah? Giving you the guidance is not that much information, just giving you the necessary points that you need to be able to bring you to clarity and to know exactly what you need to do, when and how, so that you can do it properly. Now, I just want to say that this year, there's an advantage. I often hear from people that they sit around the Seder table with his sons and daughters and grandchildren, and the kids might not be that interested. And there's all sorts of distractions. People are coming and going, and people are kvetching and complaining that the Seder is too long, and grandpa stopped reading so much, right? This year, maybe because you're sitting by yourselves, you can take advantage. You can make lemonade out of lemons and say, you know what? We're going to try our best to do this the right way. Rachamana liba boye. God wants our hearts. God knows the situation that he put us in, right? And as Jews, you know how you say why in Hebrew? The word why in Hebrew is lama. But if you can rearrange the vowels, letters stay the same. You can rearrange the vowels, instead of saying lama, which means why, to be lemma. For what reason? For what purpose? A Jew doesn't really ask why. He knows. God knows what he's doing. What do I know? What do I know why God is doing what he's doing? What I need to ask myself is lemma, is for what purpose? What am I going to make out of the situation? How am I going to use it for the best? That's what a Jew asks. And that's what we're going to do here, which is to be able to take advantage of the opportunity. We're going to make the best of what we have. We're by ourselves. We're just the two of us, right? And we're going to do the best that we can. And some of us, it's just the one of us. We're going to make it absolutely the best that we can. So let's keep this moving forward. What are the key elements of the Seder? They are 3 items for starters: matzah. We're going again, if you just joined us, we're going through the why, the what, the when, and the how of the Seder. Relatively simple, straightforward. We're not going too profoundly deep over here today. The first thing you need for the what is the matzah. The second thing is wine or grape juice if you are alcoholic or a recovering addict. Or if it's a child, you should not give them wine. You should give them grape juice. You're going to be very, very sensitive to the addictions of the alcoholic. Be very careful. Don't ever give wine. That could really set them backward, God forbid. You want to give them grape juice, so it's matzah, then wine or grape juice. And then there's the 6 items of the Seder plate. The basics of matzah, let's talk about it. The mitzvah of matzah is to consume matzah. At least a half of a shmura matzah. Get to that in a moment. The reason for the matzah, we know the famous story. It reminds us of the faith that the Jewish people had. Can you imagine if I told you that we're going on a trip to Israel, right, and we have no plan? Would you come with me? I mean, seriously? We have no idea where we're staying, no idea where we're eating. Would you come? Like, Rabbi, I mean, we like you and everything, but not that much, The Jewish people, they followed Moses into the desert. They had no idea. They were like, we're going into the desert. Okay, no problem, no plan, right? And that's what happened. They basically baked the matzah on their backs. It didn't even have time to rise. That's how fast they moved. They're grabbing crackers basically on the way out. So the matzah is a symbol of faith, that they said, you know what? We have no idea what the plan is, but we're sure that you know what the plan is. We're good. We're going to go, right? We need 3 matzahs. You have to have 3 matzahs. Oh. Why is my Zoom telling me that I need to upgrade? Oops. Ashley, are you there? I don't know what's going on over here, but hopefully it would be good. Okay, I don't know.
Rabbi, are you using the free version or the paid one?
I have no idea. I'm using whatever Ashley told me. I have no idea. Hopefully it's going to be good.
The free version closes out at 40 minutes.
I don't know. Ashley put me on this. I have no idea what's going on.
And according to mine, you have 9 minutes left.
Oh, I better hurry then. There's no Shabbat HaGadol sermon then in that case, right?
You just go right back on.
Okay, look, if we need to, we'll go straight back in, right? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
All right, everyone mute themselves again.
Gotcha. I muted you all. Don't worry about it. Perfect. Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Moving forward. So you're supposed to have 3 matzahs on top of the Seder plate. So you have your Seder plate. We're going to explain that in a few minutes. But on top of the Seder plate, you got to have 3 matzahs. Okay? Corresponding to the Kohen, the Levi, and the Israelite. Now, what are these matzahs supposed to be? It's a mitzvah to have the Shmura matzah. That's the matzah that you're supposed to have. The Shmura matzah is the matzah that was guarded. That's what Shmura means. It means that it was guarded. The wheat was guarded from the time of harvesting in the field. It was guarded so that it wouldn't come in contact with water. Because when wheat comes into contact with water, then it starts to ferment. Even if it's out in the field, it might ferment. And if it ferments for more than 18 minutes, then it becomes chametz. Matzah is made when water and flour come into contact and come out of the oven before 18 minutes. So matzah shmura means extra special guarded matzah, and that's the mitzvah to have. Handmade, the round, the circular matzah. It's such an important mitzvah that, when a wealthy Jew once approached the Rebbe and he offered a hefty donation for a big project, right? For a big project. The Rebbe said, okay, I'd like you to sponsor a program to distribute shmura matzah to Jews in Israel. And the guy was like, I was actually thinking more like buildings and stuff. Buildings, they last for a very long time. The shmura matzah, you eat it in no time, it's done. And the Rebbe said, actually, if you're asking me what I think a big project is, then this is what I consider a big project. So that gives us a little perspective on how important it is to actually eat the shmura matzah on Passover, right? And when we eat it, there's actually a minimum you have to eat. You have to eat a bare bones minimum of half of a shmura matzah. Right? And if you get in the small ones that we're giving out at the shul, there would be a full shmura matzah of the one that we're giving out at the shul. You have to have minimum. Eat at least a full of the small round shmura matzahs or a half of the large round shmura matzahs. That's the matzah. Moving on to the 4 cups. What do we do with the 4 cups? The 4 cups have to be, the reason we have the wine is because it's got to be a prominent drink, just like we do on Shabbos. We sanctify the Shabbat at the beginning and at the end with Kiddush and Havdalah, with the most important drink, the most expensive drink in the world. So too, we do this on Pesach, but on Pesach we do it 4 times because the theme of 4 occurs a lot of times on Passover. There's the 4 sons, there's the 4 expressions of redemption. The theme of Passover is breaking free. That's the theme of Pesach. Not only breaking free from a historical bondage in Egypt, but breaking free, more importantly, from my problems. So if you're struggling spiritually, if you're in a broken relationship, if you're in a broken relationship with God or with your wife or your husband or your children or yourself, then breaking free would mean you need a Passover experience. And we all need a Passover experience. We all need to reinvent ourselves. By the way, if you like gematria, the gematria of kos yayin, of a cup of wine is 156. If you multiply 156 by 4 cups of wine, it becomes 624, which is the gematria of the word freedom, which is cherut. So 4 cups of wine, the gematria is the same thing as freedom. A quick meditation here I want to share with you is that we have matzah and wine at the Seder. Wine is flavored, it's delicious. Matzah is tasteless, it's awful. There's no taste to matzah. Right? Why do we have both? Because matzah represents faith, that which you don't understand. You just do what you're told. It doesn't make sense. You just do. And the wine represents geschmack. The word taste in Hebrew is also the word reason, logic. Logic and taste is the same word in Hebrew. So the wine represents logic, that which you understand. When you fathom something, when you understand it, you feel amazing. When you don't understand something, you just do as you're told. It's like dry, like a matzah. And our relationship with God involves both the matzah and the wine, where you have a rational and logic relationship with God, where you appreciate as much as you can appreciate, but then you also have a matzah relationship with God, which is a faith, based, yes, sir, I, captain sort of relationship with God. I don't only do what I understand. I don't only do the mitzvahs that make sense to me. I also do that which does not make sense to me. So it's straddling both lanes of logic, of rational and super rational, faith and logic. That's represented by the paradox of having both the matzah, which is dry, tasteless, and the wine, which is delicious and tasty, at the same time on the Seder plate. And the same thing applies to the Seder itself. You might not capture every last detail of the actual Seder. And not everything might make sense to you. But you know what? You're trying your best. And the little bit that you understand, amazing. And the part that you don't understand, that's my matzah part of the Seder. And every year, I try to make last year's matzah, last year's faith into this year's logic. Right? So every year, I'm pushing the envelope about making it more and more and more of a meaningful Seder. And you can never stop learning. L'chaim. Okay. Now, let's move on to the Seder plate itself. On the Seder plate, which lies beneath the matzah, we're going through the quick basics of the Seder. You want to have, on the top of the Seder plate, you have two cooked items. On the top left, you have a round cooked egg. And on the top right, you've got the zroa, which means an arm. Right? It's a roasted piece of meat or poultry. Some use shank bone, others use chicken leg or wing. You basically just roast it. You put it in the broiler or something, you just put it there. So what these two represent is the two offerings that every Jew had to bring on Passover. You brought a Passover offering, the Paschal lamb, which is what the Jews painted on their doorposts that first year in Egypt in the year 1313 BCE. That was the Paschal lamb. It's represented by the cooked egg. And the top right represents the Korban Chagiga, the holiday sacrificial offering, a holiday offering. Because it's Yontiv, you brought a special offering to God to celebrate the Yontiv. So there were two things going on simultaneously. There was the Paschal sacrifice represented by the egg on the top left, and you got the Chagiga offering, the Yontiv offering, sitting on your top right. Right in the middle of your Seder plate, and in the middle center and the middle bottom, you've got two identical pieces of your Seder plate, and they are the maror, the bitter herbs. The bitter herbs are of biblical origin, and they were celebrated. Moses tells them to eat the first Paschal sacrifice with matzah and with maror, with bitter herbs. Now, what is the bitter herbs? It's supposed to remind us of the agonies that we remembered coming out of Egypt. If you don't know where you're coming from, you're not going to know where you're going. That's why it's very, very important. It's critical for us to always remember the pain that leads us to who we are today. A lot of us complain, kvetch, and moan and groan about the abuse and the suffering that we've experienced in our lives. But I want you to realize for a moment, if we had no pain, we would never experience growth. Think about that for a moment. Imagine you had no nerves in your finger. You'd literally put it on a hot plate and you'd burn your hand off, and you wouldn't even know that your hand is burning off. The fact that you experience pain makes you sensitive and motivates you towards growth. And that's representing the maror, the bitter herbs, that reminds us that the pain in our life is actually the squeezing that's going to make us be able to become who we are now, who we are today. So celebrate your past, just like we do on Friday night when we say L'chadodi. We turn around, we face our demons, we face our past, saying that who I am today is only because of the suffering that I experienced until this day. I do see that Zoom is telling us that we only have less than a minute left. I have no idea what's going to happen in 30 seconds. We might experience the apocalypse here or something. We might be thrown off of Zoom. If that happens, then just get back onto the same link, and we'll be back able to continue. I can't imagine that they're going to shut us down, but hey, if that happens, then just get back straight on. We are also on Facebook.com/Jewish Gardens, and also on YouTube.com/Jewish Gardens. Meanwhile, I'm going to just continue and see what happens. We're going to believe, right? So now we're talking about the Seder plate, the middle of the Seder plate and the bottom middle of the Seder plate. So center and center bottom is exactly the same thing. It's the maror, which we use twice during the Seder. Now, what is maror? The Mishnah, the oral law, tells us five items that are appropriate for that are good candidates for the maror. However, we're not sure exactly what they are. Two of them we know for sure, and they are romaine lettuce and horseradish. Romaine lettuce and horseradish. That's what we use. We know for sure is kosher maror. Now, horseradish we know is bitter herbs. That's very bitter. But romaine lettuce, it's not really that bitter. Apparently, if you leave it unharvested, then it becomes bitter. Right? This reminds us of the slavery in Egypt, which actually began under Joseph. The Jews lived in Egypt. They had a good life. Pharaoh came out. It was patriotism, it was nationalism. Everybody was building pyramids or whatever they were building. And slowly but surely, what started off fun actually became a bitter persecution. So just like the romaine lettuce started off good, but then it became bitter later, that's the message here of using romaine lettuce. We basically take a lot of romaine lettuce, we shred the horseradish on top. I see that Zoom threw us off. So if you are on watching on YouTube or on Facebook, then just stay tuned. We'll be right back. And I see Elaine is on YouTube. And if you are on Facebook, then you can stick around over there. Actually, I wonder, I see you watching us on Facebook. I wonder why Zoom threw us off, but hey, they did anyways. So I'm moving back into the Zoom account. I'm going to open back into that same class. Hopefully it's going to be able to work now for another 40 minutes. Let's see if that works. I'm going to open the meeting for everybody else. Let's see if that works. I'm going to take a quick commercial break here, I guess, to make sure everything's working properly. Phew. Okay, I think we're back.
Hi, Mickey. Hi, Cookie.
Because I actually got dressed today. I'm not in my pajamas.
No, not me. The hair is back in gray.
Oh boy, am I?
You don't want me to stand up.
Oh boy, I think I'm in the
Okay,
wrong-
that's a visual, Mickey. I don't know.
Oh boy, I don't know what's happening, folks.
Put your video on.
Am I? So this is in real time right
You
now.
only
Right?
have 7 months.
Seven
7
of us.
months now.
Okay, fine. So I wanted to say this, Mickey. I need you to unmute yourself, mute yourselves, because I don't think I can mute you right now.
Yes.
I don't believe I can mute you right now, so I'm gonna have to have you mute yourselves, everybody.
All right, everyone move themselves.
Yes, if you could just mute yourself, please, folks, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Okay, that way we can carry on. So if everyone can please mute yourself, it's a bit annoying, but I don't know what just happened. I don't really understand how that works, but we are continuing again on Facebook. We're
I'll
still here.
explain to you tomorrow what happened.
Mickey, thanks.
Yes.
All right, so we're still on YouTube, we're still on Facebook, and I'm going to carry on the class seamless integration into the next level. Good. Okay, fine. So I cannot mute them on that group because something just happened to my other account here. So I don't know. Whatever. I'm just gonna go on unfazed. Okay. Good. I'm carrying on, guys. I think you're all with me. We're carrying on, right? We're just keeping this going. We don't want to go for too long here. So we're using the maror twice. The maror is used twice during Passover, during the Seder, and that's why we have 2 items on the Seder plate. The bottom right and the bottom left of the Seder plate is our next questions. That's what we're going to deal with right now, and let's find out what those things are. So on the bottom right, we've got the charoses. The charoses, which represents the thick mortar, the bricks with which they enslaved us, that they forced us to build this. If you make the charoset, you can buy this stuff, honestly, out of, the kosher caterers, CEK caterers, they'll deliver for free. You can use Kosher Central. We posted that information in our community email. Charoses, you can make it out of raw fruit, nuts, spices. A lot of people have different customs depending on where you come from in the world, ranging from apples, pears, dates, pomegranates, walnuts, of red wine, which would remind us of the plague of blood. Right, that would remind us of the plague of blood. And big problem, by the way, in the Middle Ages when the Jews were accused of blood libels. Big problem. They wouldn't even drink the red wine. The red wine reminds us of the blood of our ancestors. In the Middle Ages, many of the Jews didn't drink red wine. They would drink white wine. So the Goyim shouldn't think that we were drinking wine at the Passover Seder. Remember, the blood libels was a horrible time for the Jewish people. And later in the Seder, the time, when do you use the charoses? You basically dip the maror in the charoses. That's what you're supposed to use the charoses for. Just a little dipping. You're not supposed to overwhelm the maror. And the last thing is the karpas. On the bottom left of the Seder plate is the karpas, which is the vegetable. You can use any vegetable with many customs, like celery, parsnip, radish, cabbage, raw onion, cooked potato. The Chabad custom is to use a potato or a cooked potato or a raw onion. Does anybody have any idea why? Any idea why we have karpas on the Seder plate? We know why we have the bitter herbs. We explained why we have the egg and we have the shank bone. And we explained why we have the charoses, right? But why do we have the vegetable? Any ideas as to why we have this? The reason is so that you should ask. It's in order to inspire the attendees of the Pesach Seder to ask, what's going on? Why are we doing things differently? Hence the first question of the Manishtana is, what's going on over here? Why are we doing things so differently? Now, if you just joined us, to remind you, we're having this Seder crash course, how to make a more meaningful Seder at home, and we're covering 4 items, 4 questions. Why, what, when, and how. And we've already covered the why and the what. We've got 2 more questions to cover in our session here tonight, and they are the when and the how. And this is the most tricky part, because I think the parts until now you're probably more familiar with. We were just going through the basics, but now this is the part that I find that people struggle with the most. You know, when I first moved to Palm Beach, I couldn't believe it. The first year I had some Jews living down my street. Came the Pesach Seder, you know, I'm running to Publix, I'm doing my things, you know, Pesach doesn't begin till like 8 o'clock. And I'm seeing my neighbors, the Jewish neighbors, they got like 14 cars outside the house. It's 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. It's like middle of the day still. Comes like 7 o'clock. The cars were leaving. I'm like, I haven't even started my Seder. What's going on over here? I couldn't understand. It was a culture shock for me until I realized, and I spoke to them, that they're not waiting till nightfall to be able to start their Seder. And this, my friends, is a very, very critical component of the Seder. I said before in the why that the night of Pesach is the night of freedom. You can't just do this on a fine day in June or in December. You got to do it on the night of Pesach. That's when the energy of Pesach is the energy of freedom. And the energy of Purim is on the day of Purim. And Rosh Hashanah is on Rosh Hashanah. You can't play around with this stuff. This is the reason for the Jewish calendar. So if you're going to observe Pesach like 5 hours before or even 1 hour before the night of Passover, then you've missed the boat. It's kind of like boarding a train 2 minutes before the train arrives in the station. You're like, I don't care. I'm doing this on my watch. I decided now's the time, so I'm boarding the train. If there's a train here or not, you know it's going to happen. It's going to be pretty ugly if you try to board the train before the train arrives in the station, right? You want to make, and the same thing applies if you want to board the train after it leaves the station. It's not going to help. You can't arrive at the airport after they close the door to the airplane because that plane is taxiing already. It's gone. You want to make sure you arrive in the window of when you're supposed to arrive, because that's when you're going to be able to board the plane and experience and reach your destination. That's why, my friends, it's so important to experience Pesach at the time of Pesach, when God is opening the energy of Pesach, the energy of freedom. And that, my friends, in Palm Beach does not begin. It doesn't begin until nightfall on Wednesday night next week. Now, nightfall Wednesday night next week in Palm Beach is 8:06 p.m. So anything that you do before 8:06 p.m. is nice practice. You could do it with the kids on Zoom or something, but it's not the Passover Seder. Anything that you did before 8:06 p.m., you've simply not experienced a Seder. Now, this year is the easiest year to do a proper Seder, because every other year you got excuses, the kids and bedtime, and they got school tomorrow and all sorts of problems. This year, it's just us. Nothing's going to happen if you take a nap in the afternoon and you just come in time for the Seder. It'd be amazing. Hannah and I once went to a restaurant in Boca, a kosher restaurant, and I think it was New Year's Eve. And it was like 11 o'clock, and we see like 20 80-year-olds show up, and they look like they just woke up from a 12-hour sleep. Apparently, these guys slept all day so that they could come to the restaurant to experience midnight at New Year's Eve at the restaurant, all together. And it's cute. We said we should do that at the Seder. Be a lot of fun. I see Rob Berg is asking a question on Zoom. In what time zone does God reside? Fascinating question. Isn't it a evening somewhere, like in Israel? I guess you could say it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? This was a fascinating question when the first Jewish astronaut went off to outer space, Ilan Ramon. And he took, he had a sitter with him and a Kiddush cup. He had a question. When do you have to make Kiddush? Do you have to do Kiddush when every 168 hours or whatever, every 7 days? Or do you have to make Kiddush every 7 sunsets, which by him in outer space was like every 4 hours? And the rabbis ruled that you have to go by wherever you are. God gave the Torah, Rob, not to the angels. He gave it to us human beings. And we can only be in one place at one time. Wherever you are, that's where God wants you to observe Passover. So yes, it might be Pesach in New Zealand right now, but you're not in New Zealand, and therefore you can't observe Pesach. Wherever you are, that is where God wants you to observe Passover. And that's why you got really no excuses this year, guys. You can't complain that the kids or the grandkids are too tired. It's just us, right? There's nobody else. Not like you're even having guests. It's just the two of you. So you might as well just experience Pesach properly, and that is when we begin the night of Pesach. The Jewish day begins first with night and then with day. And it's a very interesting concept that first comes night and then comes day. We always start at sundown until sundown the next day. The reason is because every night is followed by a day. Every suffering is followed by a healing. Every struggle is followed by a comfort. And every down is followed by an up. So this is a very powerful energy that we want to connect with. We start the day on at nightfall. So that's when we begin the Passover Seder. Don't do anything before nightfall. By all means, you want to eat something. You know, at Chabad Palm Beach Gardens, when we do Passover, we always play around a little bit. I'll explain your question, Mickey, in a second. We always play around a little bit. We don't. If we called the Seder for 8 o'clock, then like nobody would show up, right? So we call the Seder for like 6:30, and we play around a little bit. We daven, and we give a little speech, and we serve some food, and everybody kind of calms down a little bit. So by the time we actually start the legal Seder, the most important, significant parts of the Seder, we've had a few speeches, we've had a few l'chaims, we've had not l'chaims, so we've eaten the first course. So that way we start sharp at 8:06. Is when we're able to really start the mitzvahs of the Seder with Kiddush. We'll get to that in a moment. Mickey's question, what's the difference between nightfall and sunset? Sunset is approximately 18 minutes before nightfall. That's the answer to your question. Nightfall is the end of twilight. Sunset is the beginning of twilight. It's a very important legal definition in Jewish law. And if you ever want to know what your legal times are, you can go to jewishgardens.com/calendar, I believe it is. jewishgardens.com/calendar. There's a way. Yeah, candle lighting time is sunset, Andy. Candle lighting time is sunset, and 18 minutes later typically is nightfall. If you ever want to know, you can look at the Chabad calendar, and the candle lighting time is sunset, but the nightfall is always the time of Motzi Shabbos. It's roughly when Shabbos comes out on the Saturday night. So we start the day a little early from sunset, and we end the day a little late at nightfall because twilight is the twilight zone. We don't know if twilight is part of yesterday or part of tomorrow. That's why we end the day legally. I mean, we basically push the envelope that we don't do anything that relates to tomorrow until nightfall, and we do everything that relates to today until sunset. So twilight is the twilight zone.
So the point on when relative to this one is you light candles like 7:30, 7:20 something.
Correct.
And you take a break. You don't start the Seder until at least 8:06, no earlier than 8:06.
No earlier than 8:06. Absolutely. You're going to do this mitzvah. If you're going to connect to the energy of Pesach, you've got to do it during the time of Pesach, and that can only be achieved after 8:06 p.m. in Palm Beach. However, if you're in some other time zone, then look it up. Look it up. You can just go to, there's a link. If you go to jewishgardens.com/calendar and you look at the halachic times, you'll see every day. Click on every day. You'll see the halachic times of every day of the calendar, and depending on which time zone you are, it's very easy once you work it out on our website. Now, good. Okay. Now we're moving on to our final question. We spoke about why, we spoke about what, and we spoke about when. Now we're going to do our final piece, which is how. That's what we're going to cover right now. So how are you supposed to observe Pesach? First of all, remember, take it easy, relax. Hashem set it up this way. It might not work out exactly the way you want it. It's going to be good. It's going to be fine. Let's make it the best way. Make it the best way that we can. And ultimately, we're serving God this evening. We're doing our best shot. We're giving our best attempt at how to make this work. So let's go through the how. The first thing, like Andy said, you got to light candles. Women and girls have a special mitzvah to light the Yom Tov candles. You'll find the blessing in the Siddur. You'll find it at the beginning of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. It has the blessings for Yom Tov, L'Hadlik Ner Shel Yom Tov, and Shehechianu. When you light the candles, that's beautiful. Before you want to light the candles before Yom Tov, if you're lighting the candles on Yom Tov, then you have to use a pre-existing flame because you can't strike a match on Yom Tov. On Shabbos, you can't strike anything. But on Yom Tov, you are allowed to light from a pre-existing flame, right? That's why the second night of Yom Tov, at the second Seder, you want to light after. You'll see in our calendar, it says lighting candle after like 8:12, I think it is. I'll check it out 1 second. Here, so in our calendar, it says over here, on the second night of Passover, you want to light candles after 8:17 p.m. It's a little later the second night. And that's when you want to start your second Seder after 8:17 p.m. because obviously the candles relate to the second night of Pesach, not to the first day. So you don't want to do that anywhere near sunset or twilight. You want to make sure it's after nightfall. Okay. Now, moving forward. Something's going on my screen. Sorry. Minimize that. Good. Okay. So that's the candle lighting. Now, 8:06 p.m. on the first night, 8:17 p.m. on the second night in Palm Beach Gardens. You want to start Kiddush. Everybody makes Kiddush. What does it mean to make Kiddush? You need to use a cup of wine, which has a minimum of 3.2 ounces. Very important. And when you drink that wine, you don't just take a little ceremonial sip and put it down. You've not fulfilled the mitzvah if that's all that you've done. You have to drink a 51% majority of the cup at the very least. Best is to drink the whole thing bottoms up, which means you got to drink at the very least 1.6 ounces of that cup of wine. Very, very important. Now, you do fill the cup to the brim. Remember, my cup runneth over. It's all about the blessing. You're manifesting the blessing with a cup of wine. When you drink that wine, the 4 cups of wine, you are ingesting freedom into yourself. You lift up the cup and you read the text of Kiddush. If you don't know the Kiddush in Hebrew, then don't say it in Hebrew. Read it in English. The mitzvah of the Haggadah, you know what Haggadah means? Haggadah means to tell. You're supposed to tell the story. You're not supposed to read it in a foreign language that makes no sense to you. It's got to make sense. The main mitzvah of Passover is to relate the story in a way that is meaningful. What that means, therefore, is that it's got to make sense to you. If you don't understand what's going on, you're missing the boat. So read the Kiddush in English. When you drink this cup of wine, like you do all the other cups of wine and all other important Seder, you're supposed to be leaning to the left. Kind of like royalty, you know, when you lean, I haven't really seen royalty do this, but you know, when you like sort of lean over like this, I guess, I don't know, that's probably how royalty eats or drinks or whatever. And that's a sign of the freedom, not only because we're being sentimental, but again, because we're drawing royalty and God's grace upon us as well. The next thing we do, remember there's 15 steps to the Passover Seder. The first one's Kiddush. The second one is washing our hands and eating the vegetable. We eat the vegetable, we dip it in the salt water. The purpose of that is in order to make the kids ask. To make everybody ask, why are we doing things differently? Normally after Kiddush you eat. Why are we eating this appetizer, which is a really weird appetizer? I mean, who eats radish or celery or onion dipped in salt water as an appetizer? That's like really weird. And what we're doing here is we're trying to keep the kids awake. We're trying to keep them engaged. And the way to do that is by making them ask questions. It's a creative education. It's not about telling them what to do. It's about showing them what to do. And it's also very interesting. You know, we don't just tell them about freedom. Pesach is where our people pass the gavel, pass the torch on to the next generation. That's how we are here today, because our ancestors and parents passed it over to us. So with that in mind, you realize that we don't just tell our children our heritage and our legacy and our history. We have them taste our heritage and our legacy and our history, the bitter herbs and the salt water and the wine and the matzah. We actually don't do as I say, whatever. Basically, we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. That's the point, is that we actually have them immersed and experiencing Judaism. That's the way to do it. We don't have just an intellectual conversation with them about who you are as a Jew. We also want them to experience Judaism, and that's the key to the Jewish future. It's very sad when we realize that Moses, who was the greatest leader we ever had, his own children didn't really follow in his footsteps. In fact, they were one of them at least was pretty wicked. It was one of Moses' kids who was carrying, grandkids who was carrying an idol through the crossing of the Red Sea. Can you imagine? And they used that to make the golden calf. How was it? No. Well, not through the crossing of the Red Sea. Scratch that part. Basically, the sons of Moses, nothing became of them. Why? Because they weren't present during the time of the slavery in Egypt. They didn't suffer with our people. They only heard about the story intellectually. And if you're only going to be intellectual to your kids about Judaism, there's very little hope about passing that message on. Even Moses couldn't do that to his kids. It's only the Jews that suffered together, that experienced the whole thing together. That's where you experience Jewish continuity. You know, the Nobel Prize winning Jewish physicist Isidore Rabi once explained, how did he become a scientist? Because every day when he come home from school, the other kids would be asked by their mothers, what did you learn today? But his mother would always ask him, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? Right? It's about engaging the kids. That's what this bottom line is all about. And this year, when we're doing the Seder without our kids, how can it be a meaningful Seder? I want you to realize that this year at the Seder, you and I are the kids. And the Father is Hashem. And this year, when you ask the Manishtana questions, I urge you to let loose, to have a meaningful conversation with anybody who's around the table. And if you're alone, then talk to God and talk to God. And your Manishtana question this year should be, God, where were you during the Holocaust? Your Manishtana question should be, God, how can you give us this coronavirus? What's going on? How can you do this to us? Let it out. How could you have made me suffer the way that you made me suffer? Right? Let you be the child and speak directly to Hashem. Can you imagine what kind of Seder that's going to be this year? When instead of you dumbing it down and talking to the kids, how about you be the kids this year and make it more of a meaningful Seder when you truly unload what's on your heart. If you're on your own, you can definitely do this. And even if you're with someone that you love, don't worry, you can let it out as well. You can turn it into conversation and say, God, what is this all about? And again, the Haggadah means to tell the story. And you're going to try to come to the bottom of it and try to understand what really is going on and what's the essence of our relationship with God. Right? Now, we had the Kiddush, then we dipped the vegetable in the salt water, and now we move to the Magid. Magid means to tell. It's like the Haggadah. It's the telling of the story. That's the long part of the Seder, right? Before we begin the narrative, we first break the matzah into two, because the matzah is the poor man's bread, but a poor man never eats anything whole. He only has half broken foods, right? So we take the smaller of the broken pieces of matzah, and we put it in the on top of the Seder plate, and the larger piece goes away to be hidden away as the afikoman. The afikoman represents the Paschal sacrifice, and that's supposed to be the last thing that you taste tonight on the Passover Seder, except for the 2 cups of wine that come after it. It's reminding us of the Passover sacrifice, which is the mitzvah of the night. We begin the narrative by pouring the 2nd cup of wine, and we tell the story over the 2nd cup of wine, and we ask the 4 questions, right? We ask the 4 questions. Even if there's no kids at the Seder, you should ask the questions, like I just explained moments ago, by saying, let it go. Talk to God. Make it your Seder this year. Take possession. Take ownership of the Seder as you're sitting with you've learned with me, or things that we've learned together through this year. Maybe an inspiring sermon or something that we've learned recently, and discuss that at your Seder. Make it yours. Take it and be a Chabadnik. Remember, Chabad is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. It's taking an idea that you comprehend and making it personal, making it something that you don't only understand the wisdom, but something that you feel the wisdom. Can you imagine if this year at the Seder you go through that Chabad process where you feel an idea that you, up until this moment, you understood, but now you feel that you go through Das? That could be very, very beautiful. So now we start off reciting the story. Now, at this point, I want to share with you, give you a few shortcuts, because it could get a little technical. The Haggadah itself could get a little technical, but most importantly is to read the passage right after the Manishtana, which is Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Ponder the questions, discuss them. I challenge you, by the way, if you were ever able to find the answers to the 4 questions of the Manishtana. Think about it. Why are we doing things differently? See this year, if you and the mature crowd that you have with you this year, if you are able to truly answer the 4 questions very, very clearly. It sounds like a silly point to make, but I challenge you. Do you actually know the answers to the 4 questions? Discuss that with a person that you love, with the people around your Seder, and it's going to be one hell of a Seder. Let me tell you, you're going to have a lot of fun with this. Have fun. Let go. Let it loose. Just have fun with your Seder. I think it could be a very much most memorable Seder this year specifically. Okay. You can ask yourself questions like, why are we celebrating an ancient freedom that was subsequently lost to future persecutions? You could ask yourself, what will be the point of a wise, knowledgeable person repeating a very familiar story? And then make it your story, make it a personal story. Speak about your own person. Speak to the person that you love, things that you would never have said in front of the kids. Talk about your struggles, how you came to this point, how you became the person that you are today, not despite your problems, but maybe because of your problems. They say hindsight is 20/20 vision, and maybe you could look back and say and realize how the suffering and the persecution that you've experienced in your life maybe brought you to who you are today. And make it your story about your obstacles, your limitations, your addictions, your problems, and how you can break out of your Egypt this year. Continuous progress is ideal, but not easy. What is the biggest obstacle to your continued growth? Wouldn't that make a nice conversation to talk to your spouse about this year, right? How often do we talk to our spouses about just nothing, about the cooking and about the latest movie, and we're not really having deep and meaningful conversations with our spouses? But that's what Passover Seder is about. Let's make it happen. Let's make the Seder great again. You know what I'm saying? Let's reclaim the Seder, where we ask each other, what are the biggest obstacles for us to take our marriage from good to over the top amazing? What's stopping? Cookie's laughing. What's stopping me? Now she's really laughing. What's stopping me from making my relationship with Hashem even better and deeper and more meaningful than I ever dreamed it should be possible? Okay. Now you could go through the 10 plagues. That could be fun. Go through the 10 plagues a little bit. But the most important part of the Seder, folks, right now, not to miss it. Remember, we said so far, we got the 4 cups of wine. You don't want to miss those, 1.6 ounces, each one of those cups. You want to have the 3 matzahs and a bare bones minimum of eating half a large size shmura matzah or a full size baby matzah, making sure that you ingest that. And by the way, it can't be over the time of an hour or 2. It's got to be over 4 minutes. You got to eat that matzah over 4 minutes. So you got to get cracking at it. Mind the pun. Cracking at that cracker, right? Making sure that you eat that thing in 4 minutes, and that's how you fulfill the mitzvah. Now, you want to make sure that at the end of the narrative section, so again, we started with Manishtana, we moved to the Avarim Mayinu, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, we got through the 10 plagues. The rabbis get a little technical with how many plagues they were, 200 or 250 and whatever. You could skip that part, but I want to encourage you, read the Haggadah in English. Have fun with it. Make sure that you understand it. That's the bottom line. You got to make sure that you understand it. If you read it like an ancient Greek, it's not fulfilling the mitzvah. You got to make sure that you understand the Haggadah. Read it in English. Robin is asking, doesn't matter what kind of wine, does it need to be sweet? It's got to be kosher wine, that's for sure. Does not need to be sweet. On the contrary, a lot of people have a hard time drinking sweet wine in abundance. So I know my father can't do that. So you want to make sure that it's I see a lot of our Zoom listeners moved over to Facebook, which is kind of cool. Susan and Ed and Jill, great. Dean is here too. That's great. Okay, good. Back to Zoom. So the answer is whatever wine is good for you, whatever floats your boat, just make sure that it's a kosher wine. That's the most important part. Because if you're going to be celebrating freedom on a non-kosher wine, it's like doing Passover 2 hours before the Yontif. It's like missing the boat. It's like getting on the wrong train at the right time. You know what I mean? It's just not going to work. So you don't want to do that. And now comes the most important part of the Seder, and this is right at the very end of the narrative. The very end of the narrative. And that is where we read the part about Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Whoever didn't say these 3 items has not fulfilled the Passover obligation. You have to mention them. The Passover is referring to the, the Passover, good enough. Did you turn off the water? Good. The Passover, it's so much fun teaching from home with all the kids around. I love it. So much fun. Awesome. They're so cute. So you wanna point to the Paschal sacrifice, and then you want to point to the maror, and you want to point to the matzah, and you got to make that verbal affirmation, which is considered like you actually ate the Paschal sacrifice, and by eating the matzah and by eating the maror, you're fulfilling the biblical mitzvah of redemption, which, by the way, is not just fulfilling the mitzvah. It's about connecting to the energy. It's about unlocking the code so you can draw redemption and freedom upon yourself. Imagine you need medical freedom. Can you imagine you need medical freedom? You need freedom from corona, or freedom from chronic pain, or freedom from emotional pain. We all need some sort of liberation. You want to do this right, because if you do the code properly, you're going to draw the most beautiful blessing upon yourself. After we read the narrative, you drink your second cup of wine again. You do it reclining, and you want to read, there's a section just before that second cup of wine, which starts with therefore. It's like a little narrative you read right before the second cup of wine. You want to read that little continuum which says, this is the reason why we drink the second cup of wine. And when you do that, you're able to fulfill your explanation, the obligation of explaining what's going on. Haggadah, again, the Haggadah is all about telling the story. By the way, the word Pesach, another word for Pesach, which means Passover, also means peh is a mouth, peh, and sach means to talk. Pesach means a talking mouth. The mitzvah of Passover is to talk, not to read in a foreign language. Pesach means to talk, to tell the story. That's what this is all about. Now we're wrapping up our final section over here, which is the how. We did the why, the what, the when, and now we're doing the how. We're moving into the matzah. We did Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, Magid, Narachta. After you read the narrative of the Haggadah, now you're getting into the matzah and the maror. When you get to the matzah, you want to wash your hands like for bread 3 times on the right, 3 times on the left. You make the blessing and you recline and you make 2 blessings on the matzah. One is for Hamotzi Lechem and Aretz, and the other one is Al Achilas Matzah. It's a biblical commandment. Oh boy, we have 10 minutes left again. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap it up here. So the deepest symbolism of the hand washing, Corona, everybody's washing hands all the time. The whole world became like rabbis now. We're washing our hands all the time. So the washing of the hands is because most of human activity is through our hands. And when we sanctify our hands, we're sanctifying our activities. By washing our hands, we're being mindful of our eating, mindful of our money, mindful of our actions. That's the concept of washing the hands. Then after we ate the matzah, again, you had to eat the bare bones minimum was half of a round large shmura matzah or 1 full baby matzah that we're giving out at the Chabad. If you don't have shmura matzah, by the way, we are giving them out to all of our members. They should be delivered to you already or over the next couple of days to your doorstep. And we also were selling some. I think we sold out of Chabad. But Mickey told me that they're available at Sam's Club. If you want to buy more shmura matzah, they're available at Sam's Club, I believe. Okay, good. Now the maror. After the matzah, we go to the maror. What happens for the maror? Remember, it's in the middle of the Seder plate and at the middle bottom of the Seder plate. You want to take the lettuce and the horseradish. Take both. You dip it into the charoses and you say the blessing, no reclining over the slavery, over the bitterness. And that's when you eat you eat the maror. You eat it. After you ate the maror, you now take a sandwich, and this is like the real killer here. You already ate a matzah and you ate the maror. Now you put them both together. Right? Because Hillel said that you have to have a sandwich. So now you take the sandwich, you take the matzah and the maror, and you do the same thing over again, basically, but eating it in the sandwich form. And by this time, you've now had 2 cups of wine. You've had a vegetable dipped in salt water. You've had 2 matzahs by now. Remember, you had the matzah of the matzah and you had the matzah of the sandwich, right? So you had 2 little baby matzahs already, and you had 2 healthy servings of the bitter herbs. I don't know who's in the mood of a whole meal right now, because I'm not. But now comes the meal, right? So this was one heck of an appetizer you had leading up to the meal. But for me, I just eat some salad and fish, and I try to taste some of the meat. But I find that I don't have the appetite. I think that for me, shmur matzah is absolutely delicious. I love it. And I love eating the shmur matzah. The wine is delicious. I'm good by now. So I have some salad, some fish, and some meat just to fulfill the mitzvah. But I'm not there to take on a brisket or to take on 4 kinds of selections of fish or anything. It's just not anything which I'm able to do. But hey, your call. At the end of that meal, you're nearing the very end of the Haggadah. Right now, what you want to do is that you actually eat the egg. You take that egg from the Seder plate, you eat it. You dip it in salt water as well. And at the end of the meal, you want to take the afikoman and eat the afikoman. That was the large piece of matzah that you hid. You want to bring it back and you eat it. It reminds us of the Paschal sacrifice. The last thing you're eating, this is dessert. The rabbi's version of dessert, right? It's like a Napoleon, sort of. Just tastes different. Okay. Now, by the way, we don't reward our kids for stealing the matzah. It's a Chabad custom because we don't ever want to encourage anybody to steal anything. We give them presents for saying manishtana, not for stealing the afikoman. It's just not a Chabad custom to encourage anybody to steal anything, ever. After we ate afikoman, you fill up the 3rd cup of wine and you do the grace after meals. But you also fill up the cup of Elijah. Why are we filling the cup of Elijah, the 5th cup? We don't drink this one. Because Elijah is the one who's going to be the harbinger of the redemption. He's going to tell us the Mashiach is coming, and we know Mashiach is coming so very soon. Mashiach is coming like any day. We're literally preparing a cup of Mashiach to say, for Elijah to tell us Mashiach is coming, so he'll be ready to say L'chaim is at a moment's notice. Okay? We then, after the benching, we drink the 3rd cup, again, leaning over. Then we pour the 4th cup. At the 4th cup, this is the fun part, relaxed. Everybody's eaten already. People are dozing off already. At this part, you read the Hallel, the verses of praise. Right? Does God have such low self-esteem that he needs our praise? No, it's not that God needs to have our praise. It's that we need to know that God is praised. We need to know how important God is in our lives. And that's the bottom line. How essential God is to our freedom and to our success. And at that point, we say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. That's the bottom line, folks. And that's our crash course on making the Seder more meaningful. What are your questions, comments, or critique? What are your thoughts there? Dean, any thoughts there? What do you say? I can't hear you. You got to unmute yourself if you're going to say something. Questions, comments on YouTube, on Facebook, anybody?
We don't reward kids for stealing the afikomen. We reward them for finding the afikomen.
Okay, but fair enough. Fair enough. If you're going to reward them for the finding, but the problem with that is that somebody's got to steal it, and that's you can't find something before it's stolen.
We don't unmute. I did unmute it.
No,
We don't steal it. We hide it.
We hide it.
Okay, so you hide. Fine, so very good. So maybe you hide it, but then the kids that steal it are stealing it from where you hid it. Look, you can get. I'm sure you can understand this concept. No worries. I mean, it's just a different custom. There are many
Rabbi, I have
different
another
customs.
shot.
Another shot. L'chaim. Any other questions, folks? Anybody else? Sandy, how you doing over there? Alyssa, any
Just
questions?
one thing. I don't know whether everyone saw it. You said Sam's Club. It's not Sam's.
It's BJ's, and it's Costco and Boca as well. Stephanie, Warren, any questions, guys? Sidoron is there with us. Rob Berger, anybody else? Questions? How are we doing, guys? Are you able? Are you excited? Are you ready to do the Seder by yourself? Is anybody here that's doing the Seder for the very first time on their own? That's leading the Seder on their own?
All by myself.
Sandy, is that you?
Yes, I'm by myself.
So
I'm
you're
not
on
happy
your
about
own.
that.
Sandy, are you confident? You feel that you got the tools to make this happen right now?
Absolutely. I have 3 different Haggadot, from children's all the way up to adults. That's not the issue. It's just the emotional issue being by yourself.
So I want you to identify with the Rebbe who sat by himself at the Seder, okay?
Yeah.
If the Rebbe can do it, you can do it. You know, and you're not alone. You're never alone. A Jew is never alone. Hashem is right there with you. Was that Bob Wertheimer? I didn't know he was here. Bob, was that you?
Yes,
Oh, what do you say, Bob? How are we doing? How was that presentation? How do you feel?
it was good, but I've done it many times.
Okay.
But there's always a lot to learn. I made some notes, and we are going to have a great Seder this year, especially
Amen.
when Gail and I talk about things that we don't normally talk about in our Seder.
Right?
Yes.
Fantastic. So that's the goal. The goal is to make sure we have meaningful conversation, beautiful
We
conversation.
will try and get to our inner self.
Oh, and by the way, the second night of Pesach, you want to make sure that you cover something that you didn't cover in the first night. So you want to uncover an element of yourself that is, that is special, something that you didn't address, because we're always reinventing ourselves, constantly reinventing ourselves, breaking free from our inhibitions and our struggles. So in the second night, you want to be able to identify something you didn't cover the first night. Also, Chabad custom is not to say at the end of the Seder that we have concluded the Passover Seder. Chasal Siddur Pesach. We never say that in Chabad custom. Why? Because we don't believe the Seder ever ends. We're constantly reinventing ourselves every day. It's just an interesting perspective there. Chana, what did you think about it, Chana Sigelstein? How you doing over there? You captured it?
I was listening, and you are doing an awesome job, and we shall see what are we going to do.
Are you guys alone for Pesach, you, Chana and Andy?
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you do something new for the second night for Shechianu?
Yes, you're supposed to have a new fruit in the Seder plate, right?
That's your custom for Shechianu, for something new. Okay. I thought maybe you have a new suit or a new tie.
No. We have a new fruit on the Seder plate.
Okay.
Rabbi, you can be put out in 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm cutting out in 1 minute, actually. So I'm going to say this. I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us here tonight. If you have any questions, comments, do email me to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Please don't forget to sell your chametz at jewishgardens.com/set-me-free. That's jewishgardens.com/set-me-free. Somebody's asking, Rob, how long is your Seder start to finish? My Seder, I'm not in a rush. I don't have a train to catch. I don't have a plane to catch. I'm there with my kids. I tell my kids to take a nap before, and we just enjoy the journey. I'm not looking to rush to dinner. We feed the kids at 6 o'clock before they eat. Everybody's home. Nobody's hungry. And we just have a good time. We go from like 8 o'clock to 11 or 8 to 12. We're just not rushing. We just want to engage with the kids. I wish I could go to 4 o'clock in the morning, but I can't. This year, I don't have to go to shul the next morning. So, maybe I will go to 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Over and out. It's been a pleasure. Shabbat shalom, shalom. Thank you.
In the morning.
See you in the morning, 8:30, bright and early.
In the morning.
Oh, I'm still on YouTube. Sorry, folks. I see I'm still listening to you on YouTube. My apologies. I didn't turn this thing off. Oh. Hi, Ashley. Hi, Ashley. Sorry. Ashley?
Yeah.
Hi. Sorry about that. I meant to ask you, we got cut off over there during Zoom.